Hello and welcome to Season 10, Episode 16 of Unlimited Opinions. I'm Adam Bishop.
I'm Mark Bishop, and my Zoom camera makes me look like I have had third-degree sunburn, doesn't it? I look red.
You do look
Although
very red.
maybe it's just from my anger of dealing with my IT issues for the
That's
last 3 hours.
it's also not a great angle because you're like looking directly down into the camera. I don't know what kind of setup you have, but it looks like you're like over your laptop right now. I don't know what this is.
Well, as your father, I always want to look down upon you.
It's great.
Uh, yeah, well, I have it on this. I have this on this temporary cart. I've been
Mhm.
having internet issues, so I'm like as close as I can be to the router. I just need to break down and get a new internet provider because we have T-Mobile, and I don't even know why I have it because I always turn off Wi-Fi when I'm at home on my
Yeah.
phone because it's so damn slow. And I'm wondering why do I even pay for that? Um, but I think the only alternative might be Spectrum, which is
Mm.
not ideal, but hell, I might as well throw money at them for bad service.
There you go. Well, this
Any
is
event, and I've been trying to work from home this afternoon. It's been a complete and total failure. Uh,
yeah.
I got the work done in theory. Like I had to plow through some bigger
Mhm.
projects intellectually, like I needed to not be interrupted. So I got that part done. But then when I actually had to do any work, drafting and the computer work, it's just been nothing but
Right.
like an hour and a half of frustration.
That's
And then I
good.
was like, oh shoot. Yes.
That means you'll be well prepared for this episode,
Yes.
which is the season finale of season 10. I think I mentioned last time that I thought we'd have
It
two more
is the
episodes.
it is the penultimate
Nope,
then.
it's the ultimate. It is the ultimate episode, the final episode. We had two more sections, as I mentioned last week. One on biographical sketches and one on random thoughts. And I didn't realize that these were pretty light on content, really. The biographical sketches are sketches of Thomas Sowell's own life, or of course, reading or finishing this
Yeah.
time the Thomas Sowell reader. Very interesting, but not too much to go over here, I think. So maybe we'll spend sort of the last part of the episode talking about next season. But yeah, I don't know if you want to just get
Well,
started with
we, we have a recap of all his brilliant
that
thoughts
is
too,
true.
our,
That's true.
our impressions of him. So it's a good penultimate
Nope,
episode.
ultimate, the final episode, not the one before the
It
last.
seems like it should be. That should be like, it sounds like it should be like the celebratory last episode,
Hmm.
penultimate.
Well, you're
And
just
it's
getting
like
that.
ultimate. It has the ultimate in there.
Yes, but the pen means before. It's the one before the ultimate.
Yes. I know, but it just sounds to me like that means it's really ultimate.
That's
I
ridiculous.
mean, at a kind of a common sense, I bet you if you ask people which is the end episode of a series, the final or the penultimate, and they'll be like, "Oh, the penultimate." I
Hmm.
bet you. You should go
Probably.
around campus, take a survey of 100 students, and
I'll
see if I'm
turn that
right.
into to a linguistics dissertation.
Oh yeah, there you
Yeah,
go.
there you go.
You could be a millionaire. I hear there's big money in linguistics.
There is kind of right now. I think I mentioned this before with specifically the AI stuff. Lots of
Yes.
companies hiring linguists for that purpose specifically, but I think a lot of those jobs will be gone within 10 years. And I don't want to
I
do
got to tell
AI
you,
work.
I used an AI for a couple quick questions today, um, mainly because Lexis, the research tool, just sucks.
Hmm.
And I'm like, I just kind of want a simple form, blah blah blah. And I thought, you know what? I'm going to ask XAI, and because I have the forms, because I was having so much IT problems. I was having problems getting into my server at work, and so I have all sorts of samples and examples and stuff I kind of build off of when I'm
Right.
drafting transactional documents. But I was having such a devil of a time getting into it. I figured, well, I'll go on Alexis, which is this research database that lawyers use, and it's terrible. It's just terrible. I don't even know why I pay $1,000 a month to them
Wow.
because I was like, I'm just gonna go on the XAI, which is free, and bam, two forms. And I know enough that I'm not just gonna rely upon it. And
Hmm.
I had to heavily modify it. But it's like when you're drafting something, it's just like when you're writing, well, maybe not when you're writing, you're more of a creative writer probably. But like if just the structure of it, sometimes it helps just to have the structure, and then I change the terms and I modify it and I make it Missouri specific or whatever because I know enough to do the benefit.
Right.
It's great stuff. It's put a lawyers out of business.
Hmm.
Any event, but and probably I'll be able to write out my career
There you go.
before it takes over.
That's looking up.
Well, all those young lawyers, they're all pieces of crap anyway. No, I'm just joking. Just joking for anybody that wants to apply for a job at our firm. No, I mean they pump out so many of these left wingers now. It's
Yeah.
like, you know, it's not like there's a bunch of really earnest, hardworking people that want to be small town lawyers that give good service for working class people.
Hmm.
Everybody wants to be some hotshot lawyer at a big firm now.
Right.
Seems like.
True.
Even
All right, well,
so,
let's talk about Thomas Sowell. I'm not sure how
yes.
exactly we want to go through the biographical sketches here. These were really interesting. There's two different essays here, one called Carolina in the Morning and the other called Memories. And so the first essay was really just about, or the first article, I guess, was about his very early life. So his life before he moved to New York for the most part. And I thought this was really
Yes.
interesting. I knew very, very little about Thomas Sowell's life, well,
Hmm.
before reading this book in general, but also before reading this chapter. I knew very little, except for what he kind of alluded to a little bit in some of the articles that we've read. But I did not realize he was actually raised by an aunt and uncle. It was not his biological parents who raised him, so he was kind of in this household with his Aunt Molly, and then Aunt Molly's children were all, it seems like, much older. Her youngest child was a 20-year-old girl named Birdie, who says was especially fond of him. So it was really interesting reading about his family situation there, about how he was living essentially with a bunch of adult figures in his life from a very young age, not many people around his own age.
But I'm struck about it. I knew some. Yeah, I don't think I've read a full biography of him, but I have looked into his history. And well, I have read the biography of Clarence Thomas,
Hmm.
and I see a lot of parallels between the two of them. They both, like Clarence Thomas, I think was adopted by his grandparents, if I remember correctly. I haven't looked at it in a little while, but certainly lived with them for a long period of time. Was basically raised by them, and similarly. Thomas Sowell was essentially raised by in what is it? It would have been his great aunt, I guess,
Hmm.
because but he was adopted as if she were his mom. I
Yeah.
think, isn't that right?
Yes. Yeah, that's
So
right.
yeah, and so they both had that, and both were dirt poor in their youth. And he doesn't mention this in this section, but they were both radicals in their
Hmm.
young adulthood. Marxists, both of them. I mean,
Yeah.
people don't know Clarence Thomas. That's part of the reason why I think he's such a stalwart conservative, is that he chose to be one. Like he was something completely different. He understands the leftist mentality and the philosophy behind it because he studied it and believed it, and then he realized this is stupid,
Hmm.
basically. And so Thomas Sowell is very similar. And I like how he was, he mentions, you could see from his history, his life history, how he came to the conclusions ultimately, that he did, with his conservative principles and just his no nonsense attitude towards life and and for study, and his belief that even if you're disadvantaged financially, as long as you have a work ethic, but he also recognizes you need a family support system such as it is.
Hmm.
His wasn't an ideal childhood, but he was loved and he was supported, and his family valued education, even if they were not educated themselves. So
Hmm.
there's a recognition there that there are cultural forces. And he talks about how he went, like, I think it was some younger relative that
Hmm.
went to the same high school he did. But he said, well, that wasn't the same school, that was the same building.
Yeah.
And he's making the point that the standards were really degraded after his generation went through that same school. And he also meant he kind of describes like a sweet spot where he was raised partially in the South,
Hmm.
before and he said in his youth he didn't even he had like almost no interactions with white people. It's
Yeah.
completely black community. And so he feels like he was, his generation was his, I guess the generation above him was the first generation post slavery. So he didn't have that. And then he really finished his academic career, if I remember correctly, got his PhD and published well before the civil rights changes
Yeah.
where you'd have affirmative action that might have um, denigrated his achievements,
Yeah,
if that
because I
makes
think
sense.
yeah, because I think
If
he
I'm explaining it
mentions
correctly.
yeah, he mentioned, I think it was, well, his mom and who he calls his mom and dad, really his great aunt and great uncle, they were like the first generation born after slavery. And so he was
Yes.
born, immediately after sort of Jim Crow was kind of fading. And then, yeah, before, as you mentioned before, a lot of the affirmative action policies. But it was really interesting because, yeah, he grew up in Charlotte, North Carolina. And like you said, yeah, very much dirt poor. I thought this was interesting. He says, the first house I remember our living in was a wooden house at 1121 East Hill Street in Charlotte, North Carolina. It was near the bottom of a tall hill on an unpaved street, like most of the streets in the black neighborhoods. Daddy put a paved walkway in our yard and made a little window in the kitchen door in the back, both remarks of distinction in which we took pride. And then he goes on to say, we had no electricity, no hot running water, no central heating and stuff like that. But the idea is just like, yeah, this little paved walkway and this tiny window, like in the back door, those were marks of distinction. So like he had
Yeah.
very, very little growing up, but throughout this whole article here, especially you get to see the sense of how much he appreciated his family, right? Not just his great aunt and uncle, his mom and dad, but also their children who raised him, both sometimes kind of as siblings and also kind of as parents sometimes as well, kind of filling in the roles there. Really interesting.
Yeah, and to come from that and end up being a um, fellow or whatever they want to call what he calls it, distinguished professor at
Mhm.
the Hoover Institution in California for many, many years,
Right.
best-selling author of I don't know how many books, and have such prominence and success throughout his entire adulthood. It's just a great American story, and the
Mhm.
fact that this hasn't been made into a book, or I'm sorry, made it into a movie. This not really rags to riches, but coming from almost nothing, and it's a fascinating tale. And same thing about Clarence Thomas, although there is a biography of his that I've seen it on Prime.
Mhm.
Um, and so because he came from, he didn't have indoor plumbing.
Yeah.
Clarence Thomas didn't. I think he was raised by a sharecropper, literally
Mhm.
sharecropper, down south, and he got a start in Missouri. I don't know if you knew that, the Attorney General's office,
Right. Yeah,
Clarence
I
Thomas.
think I saw that movie with you.
Oh, okay. Well, there you
Right.
go. I'm wasting my time telling you the
Oh, there
same
you go.
thing.
Oh, you're telling the audience.
That's right, our listener out there. Anyway, but that's a great biography,
Hmm.
the documentary of Clarence Thomas. So if you get a chance to see that, it's really entertaining too. It's compelling, I think. But in any event, but Tom, the life lessons he learned, I think, really carried him through, and ultimately, I think, brought him to the truth. Like where he was able to study things based upon the facts, he talks about the ideologues and all that. But I think that he talks about, I was pretty interested. He mentioned like a story that what was it? It was oh yeah, he talked about a story about his female dog Bruno,
Hmm.
and she was weaning her puppies, and he felt bad because they chase after her and try to nurse, and so he basically held her down as a little kid to allow the puppies to nurse, and then he was told by the adults, no, she's doing that for their own good,
Hmm.
and he says, fortunately, the grown-ups saw what was happening and explained to me one of the lessons of life, that pups must be weaned for their own good. And he took that as a life lesson
Yeah.
experience that he kind of called back to, and where he knows that dependence on others is not good. It's not a sign of strength. Sometimes you
Right.
have to wean people from that type of dependence. So I thought that was a good example. And he mentioned another one. I'm trying to think what it was. Um, no, there was another one that he said was a life lesson. I had a little asterisk next to it, but now I
Was
gotta
it
find.
the story about the dog seeing the bone and the reflection?
Yes,
Yes, yeah, that
yeah,
was yeah, that was
yeah,
earlier on in the chapter. He says Birdie, who's I guess technically his cousin, read him a story about a dog with a bone who saw his reflection in a stream and thought that the dog he saw had a bigger bone than he did. He opened his mouth to try to get the other dog's bone, and of course lost his own when it dropped into the water. There would be many occasions in life to remember that story.
yeah. It's that not appreciating what you have
Yeah.
and envy of another, and how chasing that. ends up losing what you have, and it's a sad, but it's just kind of like an Aesop's fable, where there's a life lesson in there,
Right.
like a true life lesson that you can learn from a very simple story about a dog and a bone.
Right. Yeah, and you can definitely get a sense for how much he worked for a lot of what he did. I mean, he mentions kind of at the end of that first article about how he was moved up a year in class because he was just somewhat, naturally very, very smart.
Yeah,
And so he's moved up to kids of his own age, and that kind of leads into the next article titled "Memories."
yeah,
And he says, he talks about, his later on, he meets the rest of his biological siblings. He says, they were all very smart, very mathematically smart, but not very, literature type smart in that regard. But like he worked very, very hard, throughout his education. And that was something that he really appreciated. You really get the sense of that, that it wasn't just a given for him, that he had to work for those things, and he appreciated the work that he put in. And that's where you get the story about his niece much later on saying she went to the same school as him. He says, no, you went to the same building, right? It's just not does
that's
not have that
right.
same work ethic, does not have that same attitude of you actually have to do these things. You have to learn this stuff because it is good for you to learn it. Um,
And this is the quote I was alluding to earlier,
mm,
where he talks about the timing. Like when
right.
you mentioned he went to that school and it was still a good school. He mentioned timing was, excuse me, timing was on my side. Another way, I happened to come along right after the worst of the old discrimination was no longer there to impede me, and just before racial quotas made the achievements of blacks look suspect. That kind of luck cannot be planned.
Hmm.
Huh. And so, he doesn't say, it's divine inspiration, but it couldn't be planned by him, and he recognizes that he had an opportunity because of when he was born and when he took advantage of those opportunities he was provided. And I thought that showed a lot of insight and a certain amount of humility too. I mean, for a guy that's this accomplished
Hmm.
and well known and respected, at least among people who know about him. He's kind of a hidden gem to a lot of American
Yeah.
society, but to realize, hey, he did have some benefits just from the timing of when he was
Hmm.
in academia and pursuing his career. And of
Yeah.
course, he studied under Milton Friedman,
Yeah.
who was a brilliant man.
Hmm. Yeah, I like what he says, also talking kind of about his own writing there. He says, most of my writings on public policy issues in general and on racial issues in particular were directed toward the public or toward policymakers and tried to show where one policy would be better than another. These writings were not advice directed towards less fortunate people as to how they could cope with their misfortunes. I am not Dear Abby. My hope was obviously that better policies would reduce these misfortunes. Nevertheless, clever media interviewers insisted on asking me such questions as, but what do you say to the welfare mother or to the ghetto youth? Right. So that's kind of the problem that I've had to deal with, throughout my whole career is that people, take it when you're talking about these big picture issues. It's like, well, what do you say to this particular person who would like to benefit from those specific policies? And he's like, well, that's not my goal. That has never been my goal. And he goes on to talk about, how a lot of his writings on racial issues become much more widely read, much
Yes.
more sort of taken up by the general public, and people are just not as interested in sort of the nuts and bolts, I guess, of his economic writings. And that was really interesting to me. I mean, it makes complete sense. I mean, it's much easier to sort of sensationalize those sorts of issues. But it's that idea. It's like everybody's sort of looking for those sort of more controversial topics, right? They don't care if you're just sort of saying things that make sense. They're trying to always find some sort of like gotcha, where it's like, well, that's just ridiculous that you would ever, say something like that. And he describes those as, yeah, my books on racial controversies attracted more media attention and larger sales than my books on economics, politics, the history of ideas. However, the books on racial issues were not written as an intellectual outlet, but because there were things I thought needed saying, and I knew that other people were reluctant to say them. Right? So
Yeah.
it's not about me. It's not about me trying to spread, my divine message or something. He says, no, this is an important topic, and not a lot of people are talking about this, and I want people to talk about it. And here's what I think about it.
Well, and I love his reaction to people saying, "Well, what would you say to these people?" And he says, "I cannot imagine what would have led anybody to think that I was writing handbooks for welfare mothers or ghetto youths, or either would be reading them if I were." And then he says, "Yet from the very beginning, I have argued that many of these benefits." Were not in fact beneficial except to a relative handful of middle class people who ran the programs or were otherwise in some special advantageous position. So, what he's trying to emphasize there is he's talking about public policy, and he's not trying to talk to the what he calls the ghetto youth or welfare mothers. He's trying to talk to the policymakers and the people that are running the system, that these are not really benefiting those people. His writing isn't directed to people who are receiving the so-called benefits. He's writing it to the public in general, that they aren't really benefiting them.
Hmm.
And that, I think, is a good way to look at it, and it's a correct way to answer those kind of questions that are really just critics.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Exactly. It's you're not actually engaging with what I'm writing. You're just trying to find, some way to argue with me. You're not actually engaging with my points at all. You're just trying to
Yeah.
just to make a straw man argument, make me feel bad for what I've written here.
And you're seeing that stuff day in and day out. If you watch any of the
Oh
news
yeah.
about the budget cuts now, it's like, well,
Hmm.
what do you say about those VA workers that are getting laid off?
Hmm.
And it's kind of funny because every once in a while, some of these conservative commentators and even some of the elected officials are like, tough. I
Yeah.
mean, that's gonna be life. We hired too many people, and now because we hired too many people, we have to lay off some people,
Yeah.
and that's life. And that's the adult public policy statement. It's not, it's like any business that lays off people. It's not like you're doing it because it's fun. You're
Yeah.
doing it because it's necessary to keep the organization alive and profitable.
Yeah.
And to say, oh yeah, well you can't do it because give people the SADs, or it'll hurt them financially, but that's the nature of necessary cuts when things get out of control.
Right.
Some people are going to have to find another line of work, and quite frankly, they've been told since November at least
Yeah.
this is coming, and then they were told, look, take 8 months off with pay.
Yeah.
And that argument is not being made strongly enough by the administration currently, because it's just, well, they should have taken the buyout.
Yeah.
They'd still be paid for
Yeah.
the next 6 months.
Yeah,
Anyway.
there's a really funny clip of Tom Homan kind of answering a question a little bit like that because I don't know if you saw, but Trump sort of invoked the Alien Enemies Act of like
Yes.
1798 or something like that, or the early 1800s. And this reporter goes up to Tom Homan and says, "Borders are Tom Homan," and says, "Well, that law is over 200 years old. How can you invoke that? Whatever." And he kind of just looks at this reporter funny and goes, "Well, the Constitution's older than that. And we still pay attention to that thing." And it's like, well, yeah, I mean, it's a law. It's still part of our structure here. We don't just, laws don't have an expiration date like that. We don't just ignore precedent. If it's there, it's there. It's
Yeah.
very strange, but it's, this sort of blunt, matter of fact. It's like, well, that's just the way things are. I think that's the approach that needs to be taken.
Well, that's the beauty of Trump having a second term, and we're going off a little off field, but a second divided term. So he's not going from one to the other. He's had 4 years to think about how to do this the right way, and who to hire and who to have in his administration the second go around. And I'm sure he pays attention to the polls because he wants to be loved, and also because he needs to maintain a certain level of support to keep the uh, cowardly elected officials in Washington in line. So far, he has. But it gives him a certain amount of freedom. And I'm going to go back to the same thing I keep saying is I think that shot to the ear
Yeah.
really strengthens his spine. And he's just like, nope, I'm on a mission. I'm just going to do it. And I
Hmm.
don't think that renaming Mount McKinley back to Mount McKinley is any accident, because McKinley was assassinated
Yeah.
in office. He was killed by an anarchist.
Hmm.
And I think that for some reason, I think that might resonate with President
Well,
Trump.
he's directly invoked McKinley quite a few times. I mean, on
Yeah.
the tail tariff thing, the golden age of
Yeah.
America. I mean, I think that's. I don't know. A lot of people like to point to Reagan or Nixon or something like that, but I think he's more you're wanting to cultivate sort of an idea of McKinley more than anything else.
He's trying to get to that turn of the century political structure
Yeah.
of the late 1800s, early 1900s, and more McKinley than Teddy Roosevelt, I
Yeah.
think.
Yeah.
But some Teddy Roosevelt in there too. But the tariffs, he was a big McKinley was a huge tariff advocate
Hmm.
when he was in Congress, and then I've been reading up on him. And an interesting story. I got to read a biography of him because that's one of the presidents I haven't really studied. But yeah, they got killed in office,
Yeah.
shot by literally an anarchist
Yeah.
when he was
That's
in
crazy.
some great,
Yeah.
some event.
Well,
He
let's
didn't, he
turn to
didn't really
the.
think he was in danger. He
Hmm.
thought,
I
I don't need to worry about that. And this anarchist shot him right in the
Yeah,
public, and
that's
he
crazy.
died, I think, from sepsis a few days later.
Ugh.
Yes.
So let's look at the last section now. Wrap up the book here. Random thoughts, and this was really just what 5 or 6 pages of 1 to 2 sentence sort of pithy remarks from
Yeah.
Thomas Sowell. Just a
So what?
complete variety of topics here.
Yeah,
So I
like
don't know if you wanted to,
one-liners.
yeah, I don't know if you wanted to pick out a few of your favorites here.
My dogs are going crazy. Can you hear that?
I
Um,
didn't know, but maybe it'll be picked up in the recording.
that's right. We don't need to. Okay. What's going on? Maybe I'm being robbed. Yeah, I will. How about I try to let's see if we have highlighted any of the same
Hmm.
ones. I like this one, which actually touches on my problems, some of my problems with the Catholic Church. On page 399, envy plus rhetoric equals quote social justice. I thought that was a really good one.
That is
Um,
pretty good.
that's one of the ones. Let's see, what was the other one? Oh yeah, as a rule of thumb, congressional legislation that is bipartisan is usually twice as bad as legislation that is partisan, which I think is true. You get the worst of both worlds. I will do five. So that's
Okay.
two.
Okay.
I don't know if you had those highlighted, so I was thinking that you would have had the first one.
Yes.
Uh,
Well,
how
I
about
don't
this
I don't
one?
highlight anything in books. I refuse to write in books. So
Well, you don't you take notes or anything?
not anymore.
You did.
This time I've just
That's
been
what.
going
Okay.
off of my memory
All
here.
right. So that's why you should write in your books.
That's true.
Because then so were there any of them that you can remember that were of particular interest to you? No?
Yes. Yes, there was one that was interesting because I had kind of a tangential point about it. This one about Thanksgiving. He says, Thanksgiving may be our most old-fashioned holiday. Gratitude itself seems out of date at a time when so many people feel, quote, entitled to whatever they get and indignant that they didn't get more.
Yeah.
And the reason, I mean, that kind of seems like, almost in some ways like an old curmudgeon kids these days sort of statement. But I think it's very true
Yes.
for one thing, but also because, there's another element to that Thanksgiving is a religious holiday.
Yeah.
This is something that I've seen a few people mention. It's never really crossed my mind because it's become such like just sort of an accepted like secular American thing. But it's like who were we thanking at Thanksgiving?
Right.
Thanking God. That is what Thanksgiving is about.
Yes.
It's literally an American religious holiday, and I think that's one of the biggest reasons why it's even more so out of date because not a lot of people recognize that and refuse to accept it.
Yeah. Well, I don't think it's technically a religious holiday because it is not associated with any particular
Well, sure,
religion.
sure, sure, but
I think it's a deist holiday,
I suppose, but I mean,
maybe.
it's I think it's very much
Uh,
in the Christian sort of sphere of
Certainly
things.
Christian
Yeah.
tradition, but Judeo-Christian, I would actually probably say more accurately, maybe.
Hmm.
Um, but the Muslim faith has a similar type of prayers of gratefulness, I think. I mean, I'm not an
Hmm.
expert in Islam, but so I think but certainly grateful to God.
Yes.
Period. And
Yes.
that's what the whole message was.
Mhm.
And now they're trying to convert it to, grateful to the Native Americans who
Right.
rescued, those Iroquois who rescued the Pilgrims, and it's a gratitude to our ancestors of a certain type, but not the others.
Mhm. I also like this is at
That's
the
a good
top of
point.
page. Yeah, this is at the top of page 398. What is called an educated person is often someone who's had a dangerously superficial exposure to a wide spectrum of subjects. So it's very surface level and everything. I think that one was
Yes.
very very true. So that's two for me. I don't know if you want to
Okay.
throw in a
I have
third.
another one. Government bailouts are like potato chips. You can't
Mm,
stop with just one. And boy, that's the truth. There's one bailout out of another, and you have to go cold turkey. But I like another one. Well, I like the judge thing.
mm.
There's no greater indictment of judges than the fact that honest people are afraid to go into court while criminals swagger out. It's revolving doors.
Yes, I thought you would
I need
appreciate that one.
to put that in a plaque in my office.
There you go.
I could probably make multiple copies for like the prosecutor's office and a couple of the good judges.
There you go. I also like the page 403. I guess is very similar to a topic we talked about a couple seasons ago. How anyone can argue in favor of being non-judgmental is beyond me.
Mhm.
To say that being non-judgmental is better than being judgmental is itself a judgment and therefore a violation of the principle. So yeah,
Yes.
of course, yes.
Yeah, I also recognize that one.
Hmm.
But there's like, what is it, 5 or 6 pages of
Yeah,
these basic one-liners, and
yes.
they're all beautiful in their own way.
Yeah. I liked also the one immediately before that, and that'll be my last one here. It says a careful definition of words would destroy half the agenda of the political left, and
Mm.
scrutinizing evidence would destroy the other half. Yeah,
Yes.
that's pretty good. But yeah, no, I mean, there's so many more. So I encourage any listener to try and find, just even just this section, to sort of just get a sense for a lot of what Thomas Sowell talks about throughout this whole book, sort of summarized in 1 to 2 sentences each. I think these all absolutely tied into earlier articles that we read
Yes.
throughout this season.
So, what are your general thoughts about my selection,
Hmm.
the Thomas Sowell Reader?
Yes,
Was it a good selection? Did you enjoy it?
I thought so. Yeah, I enjoyed it. It was I hadn't read anything by Thomas Sowell, as I mentioned a few times. I thought it was good, very well written, very much sort of in the facts based sort of structure of things, where it's like, well, clearly the evidence supports this rather than this, and history shows this rather than this, which is good. Not the type of stuff that I often read. In general, my stuff's more like the more philosophical type discussions. This is really good. I really enjoyed it. I thought he touched on a lot of very important topics. Thought he gave us a lot of points to jump off and talk about whatever we wanted to talk about, sort of tangentially related, very much politically related, which isn't a bad thing. But yeah, no, I really enjoyed it. That was a good pick.
I'd have to say I only had like it was a partial disagreement really by emphasis of one of his. I can't remember
Hmm.
what it was. I remember there was one episode. I was like, I think it might have been like the civil rights laws,
Yeah.
um, but more in tone than actual disagreement with what he was saying. But he's just a brilliant guy. I think he's
Hmm.
the I don't know if you'd call him a modern day philosopher or a social scientist, but I would put him in the category of one of America's best philosophers, political scientists, and social scientists. If not the best, certainly top three. I don't know who. I do appreciate Victor Davis Hanson, but Thomas Sowell is so brilliant.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. I think if there is,
Hanson's more of a historian, and he
yeah.
likes to weave in ancient Greek history and World War II history and all that kind of stuff into his current affairs analysis, which are pretty interesting.
Yeah, I think if there is one place that I, kind of disagree with him just in general, I think I mentioned this like in the education chapter, is that I think in some of his stuff, at least the tone is a little bit like, well, we should just do whatever makes the most like factual,
Mm.
empirical sense. And he doesn't really get quite into sort of the deeper sort of discussions of, why. I think it's again sort of that very much sort of facts based approach, and not so much big picture. Here's sort of the big topics, the big sort of cultural issues and stuff like that. Like that's there, but it's not like too often doesn't come up as sort of the main focus of a lot of these.
Yes.
And and,
Yes.
and, and again, I think that's a disagreement in tone or emphasis more so
Yes.
than disagreement in his
Right.
conclusions or the facts he brings up.
Yeah. He's more of like a free market, free trader, and the markets
Yes.
will work out, as opposed to, maybe putting your thumb on the scales in some way
Hmm.
to reflect your values as a society, which
Right.
which is really becoming more prominent in the conservative philosophical um, era
Hmm.
now. The thinkers in the conservative movement are much more interventionist than there would have been
Right.
with where Thomas Sowell's philosophy is more of laissez-faire.
Hmm.
The stuff will work out, but he still recognizes that there, like I mentioned, like this last chapter, about the things that he benefited from and needed to be successful,
Yeah.
other than just his hard work. And so, how do we have a culture that values that, and does the government have a role in encouraging that? And I don't know where he would view the limits of the government and intervention on
Hmm.
to assist that. Um, I don't know. I don't know what his views would be, but
Yeah.
that's a
I'm
good
not
point.
sure.
Good
Yeah.
point.
Yeah. That's
So
that's
what,
the only
what should we
place.
do for next? What should we do for next season?
I had a few ideas. I wrote them down. I took
Oh
notes.
gosh.
I have 6 suggestions.
Oh, all
That
right.
so maybe we'll pick a few of these. Maybe if you want to eliminate any of these particular ones that I have here. The
Okay.
first is Tolkien's The Monsters and the Critics and Other Essays. So that's a book. I think there's 7 essays in total in the book. But I mean, I could talk for multiple episodes about every single one of those. And those
Well, we haven't
range
done
from,
Tolkien in a
we
while,
haven't
and
done Tolkien in a while.
we haven't even mentioned Tolkien, and
That's right.
maybe the entire season. I think I might have forced it in one time
There
or
we go.
something.
We could talk.
Okay.
So that's suggestion one. That's the monsters and the
Yes.
critics and other essays. The second is Ovid's Metamorphoses. I don't know if you've ever read that. I've read bits and pieces, but I have a copy. It's actually the oldest book I own from
Hmm.
like 1889, an interlinear copy with the Latin and then the English translation immediately below it. And that is, I don't know if you know anything about it, but it's a poem. It's an epic poem originally, written in meter, in Latin meter, about essentially all of like Greek and Roman philosophy, or not philosophy, mythology. So he takes it like
Mythology.
from the creation of the world up until Julius Caesar, and it's really interesting. Lots of like moral stories in there. I'm not sure how well it would work for a podcast season, but it's split up into like 20 chapters or so, I think.
I'm pretty sure that is the only way I will ever read it.
That's true.
So that has that going for it. Like forced me to take medicine that I
There you
need.
go.
Okay, that's in the mix.
That's actually
I'm not rejecting it.
okay. Number three is Dante's Divine Comedy.
Yeah,
I read
you've
that
been
through.
talking that
Yeah,
up.
I read that through for the first time just a couple months ago. So that's one I've already read. So all three of these I think are suggestions I've read before already.
Oh, all right.
But all of these are coming just from stuff I have on my bookshelf because I think I mentioned
Oh,
last week I should
all
pick something that I haven't that I don't have to buy another book for. Although I did go out and buy like 2 more books over the
oh, of
weekend.
course.
Um,
I bought one. I bought C.S. Lewis's the something of man,
Abolition of Man.
Abolition of Man.
Yeah. I
And
bought a book
have you
from like
read that?
no, I haven't. I really haven't read much Lewis.
It's a
Uh,
little one, so
yeah.
that's why I bought it because I have at least 20 books that I still have to start reading.
Yeah, that's true. But that one, I bought a book from 52, Icelandic verse, with Icelandic on the one side and then an English translation on the other for $5 at like a
Wow,
outdoor flea
damn.
market thing that was going on. And then a book, the Penguin Book of Latin Poetry from
Huh.
1962, a little paperback that has not just like ancient Latin poetry, but like through the medieval period, like writings from St.
Huh.
Ambrose, St. Thomas Aquinas. I think the most like recent authors, like from the 1800s, writing in Latin, which is kind of
Wow,
wild. It was like $4 at a bookstore
interesting.
in town. But those aren't the options for this
Yeah.
time. So
Yes.
one
Okay.
was
So you've said three. What are the
yes.
other three?
Then four
Yes.
is Tocqueville's Democracy in America. I have volumes 1 and 2 here,
Mhm.
um, which would be good to read.
How many
Fifth,
volumes are there? I thought there was one book.
it's
Is
two
it how many
volumes. It's
volumes
two
does it
volumes.
have?
Yeah, 2 volumes.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, yes, it's just the two.
Mhm.
The fifth is Russell Kirk's Roots of American Order, which is very good. I've read that one before. And then
Okay.
sixth is John Henry Newman's Apologia Pro Vita Sua, Apology for One's Own Life, about his story converting to Catholicism from
I think
Anglicanism.
I think I have that.
Hmm. That one's pretty dense, just
Yeah,
in
that's a
terms of
big
his
thick
writing.
one, isn't it?
Yeah.
And
Well, not too thick, but just in the writing.
yes.
His writing is very.
I have like I have some sort of compilation of
Hmm.
his. So I think that might be included in it. That's the Newman Center guy, right? He's
Yes. Yeah.
the Anglican guy. Yeah.
Hmm.
So I started to read it, and it's not easy. It's not. Oh, I'm just gonna pick this up and put it down, pick it up. I mean, you gotta
Yeah.
work. Okay.
So that's all
I think that's in
six.
the mix though because I already have it, and
Hmm.
that's all six. Okay.
Yeah.
What'd I miss? Okay, six.
So we have Tolkien, we have
So
Ovid,
it's
we have Dante, we have Tocqueville, we have Russell Kirk, we have Newman.
and have you read the Newman?
I've read Newman. The only one I haven't read is Tocqueville. So maybe I should
Hmm.
have picked some books that I haven't read already.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking. I mean, do you want to reread, or do you just think that you've already read them, so these are Adam approved
Yes, these are Adam
for the
approved and things that
podcast?
I think I could really talk about.
Okay, so you'd be interested in talking about them. You know that rather than us taking a gamble on one that we haven't
Yes.
read, and it's like, oh, we get 3 chapters into it, and we're like, oh, what the hell are we doing?
Yeah, that happened with the Lakoff book.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah,
That
Lakoff,
was awful.
something off. Although I thought that was worthwhile.
I thought
I
so
really
too.
did.
Yeah, yeah.
But
It
for
made me
whatever.
realize, yeah, just how much, the left just does not understand the right, which there have been studies on that. I don't know if you've seen that, but it's,
Oh yeah.
leftists overwhelmingly do not predict correctly or do not assess correctly conservative opinions, but conservatives are much more likely to predict correctly, liberal opinions on things.
Well, we swim in their pond,
Yeah.
and so we grow up. Everything all movies, all TV shows, all media is leftist now. It
Mhm.
has been for my entire adult lifetime. So I can anticipate all their arguments generally. I
Yeah.
mean, I'm very rarely surprised, like, oh, that's an interesting point, except for if it's so absurd and
Yeah.
stupid. Oh, Jesus, what did you think that for?
hmm
But like if they make a good point every once in a blue moon, I'm like, oh, that's a good point I haven't heard before because
hmm
everything else I've heard.
Yeah.
I'm not saying they don't make good points
Right.
ever. But yeah, but they're like the funniest thing are these Scott Jennings clips from CNN. Do you ever see those?
Oh,
He's a
yeah, yeah, yeah.
commentator, and he says stuff, and the panel is just like it's like they glitch out because they're like, what? I like the one with Jake Tapper this weekend where he says he was praising Schumer for opposing the racist segregationist filibuster
Hmm.
of the CR bill or whatever, because
Right.
he said it with a straight face, like he's
hmm
actually praising him, and Tapper had to like stop him to explain to the audience he's referring to how the Democrats have called the filibuster racist and part of our segregationist past, and he's making a joke.
Yeah. Well,
So
I
the
saw.
rest
I
of
don't
them
know
are
if
like,
you've
what?
seen. Yeah, I don't know if you've seen clips. There's this guy. I think his name's Sam Sater or something like that. But he was on a show. It's been kind of going viral. Jubilee is the company that hosts them. It's I forget what they call them. But it's like one guy in the center and then like 20 people on the outside. And it's supposed to be
Oh,
like the one guy is like the odd man out. And then you get like,
yeah.
a few minutes to talk to the guy until somebody else, takes your spot. And it's like the one
I think
versus
Michael Knowles did
Michael
that,
Knowles did that
and
on the
Ben Shapiro, I think
yes.
maybe.
But this time,
Yeah.
because it's usually like one conservative against 20 liberals or 20 LGBT or whatever. But this time,
Yeah.
Sam Sater was like the liberal, and evidently he's some sort of political commentator. I'd never heard of the guy until I saw
Yeah.
these clips. But it's like 20 young conservative people, and some of these clips are just wild because you can tell that he has never really thought about what he actually believes. There's
Yeah.
one in particular where this guy's asking him, okay, so you think, all morality is just sort of preferences, right? I prefer,
Mhm.
this system over this system because, he says, I'm a secular Jew. I don't really believe I'm agnostic towards God, something like that. That's what Sam Sater said. He says, yeah, I'd agree, it's a system of preferences and stuff like that. My philosophy is sort of, just do what, leads to the most happiness. And the guy says, okay, so you're like a consequentialist, a utilitarian. Kind of goes, well, I don't have any particular strong feelings towards the consequential. He's like, well, that's just what you are. I'm just giving
Yeah.
you the
Right.
term for your philosophy here.
Right.
And he just takes him down this whole path of like, well, you have to admit that some principles are non-negotiable. Not everything can just be preferences and stuff like that. And he's just sort of dumbfounded. He just doesn't know how to respond to that. And then there's this one other person who came up a
Yeah.
little bit
Because
later.
that's a really dangerous philosophy to have, especially if you're a non practicing Jew, because there's
Mhm.
a lot of people that have a preference for murdering all the Jews.
Right.
I mean, because if you have that, if you really believe in that philosophy, then in Nazi Germany, then you're out.
hmm
Because they had the strong preference. They thought it was a net good to
Yeah.
kill all the Jews. And
Yeah.
if you don't have some fundamental philosophy against murdering people, then you're every one of us is going to be in trouble with that one. But go
Right.
ahead. I'm sorry, I
But yeah, then
interrupted you.
there's this other girl who came up later, and she was clearly doing this to be, antagonistic and inflammatory at the beginning. But she sits down, she says, I'm a xenophobic Christian nationalist. And he's sort of like, so, what? And of course, her point being is that, as Americans, we should be taking care of Americans first. We should be xenophobic nationalists and that we prioritize
Yeah.
our own people first. But he was just, so like blown away that somebody would sit down and say that in front of him. And then even just with her arguments that she was making, he just like, because she talked about the melting pot, like pot implies assimilation, right? You're melting
Yes.
into a given culture. You're becoming part
Right.
of the American culture. And he's like,
But
well,
you're
no,
also providing flavor to everybody else.
right,
So
right.
a melting pot changes everybody.
Yes.
which we're all saying is, which we all used to say, it's okay. We want to be improved by this.
Hmm.
Ben, go ahead.
Yes, but her point was being like that we should, incorporate people in and take the best parts of their culture, but
Yeah.
they're becoming part of an American culture. And he was just like dumbfounded by that. I was like, no, no, it just means that they can have the kind of their own communities and stuff like that, and everything kind of goes right. 'Cause it's this whole preferences
Yeah.
system. It's just very strange. It's
That's
like
a
they'd never.
salad. That's a salad. That's not a melting pot. That is literally a salad.
Right.
The carrots are still the carrots and they're crunchy. It's not even a stew. He's not, I mean, a stew they kind of mix in. The melting pot is like a bunch of different type of cheeses.
Hmm.
Just one becomes one big bowl of
Exactly.
cheese.
Exactly.
Like a four
Uh,
cheese blend, a six cheese blend, whatever.
yeah.
Well,
I
it's
don't know how.
interesting.
Yeah. I
I
don't know
did
how we
see
got on
like
that.
little headlines, but I didn't click on that because I didn't know who he was. And I kind of get agitated. I've watched some of those clips and I'm just like, they're just, I don't know. I get frustrated with
Yeah.
watching them.
Yeah, I've never
It's
sat
like,
through a full episode or whatever they are of one of them. I've only seen the clips because I feel like I would get very angry because it's not a good, debate formula at all
no,
set up, but
and
it's
it's,
it's
it's,
it's
it's people
designed to
that are,
get headlines and clips
yeah.
and stuff like that.
Well, I think it's useful because I think like especially when there's like 12 or 20 or whatever leftists against Ben Shapiro, and there was one trans person, a girl who's pretending to be a guy, and she flips the chair around to sit it
Mm.
like the chair, leaning on the back of the chair as if it's some sort of manly pose, and Shapiro's like, what, yeah, I don't know, it was just so weird and
Yeah,
gross.
it's very
It's
strange.
hard for me to watch those because I just get it doesn't make me happy.
Hmm.
So anyway,
Yes. Well, back to the
so
back to the book suggestions. Yeah. Is there any
of
you want
those,
to eliminate?
I don't know that I want a poem.
Okay.
I mean, I think that would be really hard
Yes.
for me. Although
So
that's
that
like I
means
said, the only way I would read it.
yeah. So that means Ovid and Dante are both out then, both
Well, I
Metamorphoses
don't.
and.
I mean, Dante's isn't Dante more of a story though?
Well, yeah. Well, so is
A
Ovid.
poem.
I mean, but they're both in meter. They're both written as sort of epic poems.
Yeah, I don't know. Um, Ovid seems longer. Is it longer?
I don't think so. I think Dante is actually longer.
I'm not saying no to them. I guess
Okay.
I would say my number one out of those six, if I can remember all six. I like the idea of going back to Tolkien. So
Mm-hmm.
I'm always a fan of, and I've not read it, so I'll be interested in that. The Cardinal Newman one, I'm planning on reading anyway, so that's kind of interesting. But I think that I don't know if will be a lot of different material.
Mm.
Other than he's making a case
Right.
or his history, and he's making this one case, and I'm sure it's complicated and it's multifaceted, but I don't know how much we can talk about it. So I'm not sure about that one. What were the other options?
Tocqueville and Russell Kirk were the two you haven't mentioned yet.
I do either one of those. So I guess my top three equally
Hmm.
tied for first is the Tocqueville, Russell Kirk, and Tolkien, but maybe Tolkien being first and the next two tied for second, and then the
Okay.
rest of them even for the third place. But I'll do any of them. I mean, I
Okay.
don't care. So we'll let you decide, and maybe we'll have a Twitter poll.
Yeah, and we'll see how many
See
people
if they
respond to that.
respond.
If there's an overwhelming amount of response on one of those options, maybe we'll go with that. But otherwise, yeah.
I think we should have I think we should have a hat giveaway, like a baseball
Oh,
cap,
okay.
with our logo on the front, and then maybe have somewhere on it the listener.
Mm,
Maybe I don't know because you can have it like or because there's only one of them out there. They keep downloading it some small multitude of times,
yeah.
in my opinion. Although the numbers seem to be going up lately. I don't
They
know if
do. They have
yeah,
been going up. It's
what's
very
going on.
strange. I don't know how more people are finding this. It's
Don't they
really
have better things to do with their time?
you would
Uh,
think.
somebody's bought some sort of service that will download like
Yes.
several hundred episodes each week or
Yeah.
something.
We have had 11.7 thousand downloads all time. So that's not a crazy amount for a
That's a
podcast.
terrible
It's a
amount for how many we put out
very
there.
small amount. But 300 of those are in March alone. And we're just a little over halfway through March. So
All right, well, somebody's interested. So
Yes.
that's
All right.
interesting to me.
Yes. Well, yeah, I'll put out a Twitter poll at ULMTD opinions, so all the many listeners can vote for whichever one of those options that they think would be best for us to cover. Um, but yeah, we'll see. Maybe Tolkien. Maybe Tolkien will be the winner.
Do you ever wear a hat, like a cap?
Not usually, no.
What about a visor?
That I would be much less likely to wear a visor. I don't.
What about if you're running in the sun?
I
You know,
can't think
like
of a
a running
single
visor.
situation where I would be wearing a visor.
It keeps the sun out of your eyes and keeps the sweat out of your face.
I could do
You know,
that with a hat.
yes, but a visor keeps your head cooler.
Does it?
It's ventilated.
Yeah, I guess so.
You're not sold on the visor.
I'm not sold on the visor. Well, we could
I,
do a hat give. It's been a long time since we've done a shirt giveaway or anything like
that's
that.
correct. Yeah. So if somebody responds on Twitter, maybe we'll send you a hat.
There we go. There we go. All right. Well, do you have anything else for this
No,
episode?
no, and I have to have a meeting tonight.
Hmm. You sound
I'm really
excited.
excited about it.
I can
Yes.
tell. All right. Well, this has been season 10, episode 16, the final episode of season 10. I have been Adam Bishop.
Still Mark Bishop.